So before I get into this, I need you to understand something. This is not a ghost story. There are no monsters hiding under beds, no demons scratching at walls. What I am about to tell you is far worse than any of that. Because every single thing in this story is something a real human being chose to do. My name is Marta, and in 1994, I was a detective in Prague. Now, if you don't know much about Prague in 1994, let me give you a little context, because it matters. The city was still learning how to breathe after decades of silence and fear. The streets were gray, the winters were long, and people had this habit of disappearing without anyone asking too many questions. It was just that kind of place at that kind of time. I thought I had seen everything the city could produce. I was wrong. So it started with a woman named Elena, Dr. Elena Voss. She was a clinical psychologist with 12 years of practice. She worked out of this small office near the old town square, where the cobblestones were uneven and the gas lamps flickered every time the wind came through the narrow streets. And by all accounts, she was really good at her job. Patient, careful, the kind of woman who noticed things other people missed. But there was one thing she did not notice soon enough, and that mistake cost her everything. So in early September, a father brought his son in to see her. The boy's name was Alexei. He was 14 years old, pale and thin and so quiet that Elena later told me it felt like sitting in a room with a shadow. He never made eye contact. He spoke in half sentences that just trailed off into nothing. The father's name was Rudolph, and Rudolph was something else entirely. So here's the thing about Rudolph. He insisted on sitting in during every single session, and he always chose the same chair, directly behind his son, facing Elena. And every single time Elena looked up from her notes, Rudolph was already looking at her, not at his son, not at the walls, not at the window, at her. So during their third session, Elena asked him to step outside, and he smiled and said of course. But when she glanced over at the door a few minutes later, she could see his shadow underneath it. He was standing perfectly still on the other side, just standing there, not moving, not leaving. Now the moment Rudolph left the room, Alexei opened up. He leaned forward slightly and whispered something, and Elena wrote these exact words in her session notes. He said, "He watches everyone, not just you." Elena asked him what he meant, and the boy looked at the door, then back at her, and he said, "He followed my teacher home last year. She disappeared in November." Elena wrote that down. She told me later she sat with that sentence for a long moment before she moved on. Something about it felt cold in a way she just could not explain. She should have called someone that same day. She did not, so a week passed. Autumn settled over Prague like a gray blanket. The street vendors outside Elena's building started selling warm spiced drinks, and the smell drifted up through her office window every morning. And during one of their sessions, she mentioned to Alexei that she loved this time of year. The cold, the smell of cinnamon from the street below. That same night, past 10 o'clock, someone knocked on her apartment door. She looked through the peephole. Nobody there. So she opened the door slowly, and on her doorstep there was a small paper bag, and inside it, a cinnamon candle, a jar of cinnamon spiced tea, and a single dried orange slice tied with a black ribbon. She stood in that doorway for a long time. The stairwell was completely dark. The building was completely silent, but she told me later that she had this very clear feeling, the kind of feeling that bypasses logic and goes straight to the stomach. That somewhere in that darkness, someone was watching her open that bag, so she called Rudolph the next morning. No answer. She sent a written message to his registered address, and his response came back by hand-delivered envelope. No postal stamp, no return address. Just a single line written in careful, neat handwriting. It said, "My son would never disrespect you, doctor. He admires you greatly. As do I." She read that last part 4 times. As do I. So 3 nights later, she was sitting at her desk reviewing case notes when she heard something outside her window. Now keep in mind she lived on the 3rd floor, and the sound was slow, deliberate, like someone shifting their weight very carefully on something narrow. She turned off her lamp immediately, sat in the dark, did not move for a very long time. The sound stopped, and when she finally looked out the window, the street below was empty. The cobblestones glistened under the gas lamps. Nothing moved, but pressed against the outside of her window pane was a single dried autumn leaf, with a small hole punctured through its center, like an eye looking in. So she terminated the sessions the following week, sent official notice to the institute. But 2 weeks after that, Alexei Novak was reported missing by a neighbor, and Rudolf Novak had simply vanished, and that is when the file landed on my desk. Now I want to be clear about something. In 1994 in Prague, a man making a woman uncomfortable was not considered a serious matter. A missing boy with no evidence of foul play was considered a runaway. I had supervisors who wanted clean numbers, not complicated cases. So I worked quietly. And the second thread I pulled brought me to a 17-year-old boy named Josef. Josef Kral lived on the eastern edge of the city. He came into the station with his mother, and I noticed right away that he was pale and he kept his hands completely flat on the table in front of him, like he was trying to hold himself steady. He told me about the night of October 14th. So there were 4 of them, Joseph and 3 friends, Petra, Lukasz, and Dominika. It was a Friday night, mid-October, the kind of cold that finds the spaces between your coat and your skin and just settles there. And they had heard about this old place called Velki Farm for years. It had been abandoned since 1981. It sat at the end of a road nobody used anymore. Dead fields on both sides, skeletal trees standing in rows like they were waiting for something. So they rode out there on bicycles, 4 flashlights between them, and Joseph told me the road was so quiet that the only sounds were their wheels on the gravel and the wind moving through the dead corn. The farmhouse was exactly what you would expect. Broken windows, a door hanging by one hinge, weeds growing up through the floorboards inside. They went in anyway, because that is what 17-year-olds do. So Lukasz found this old photograph nailed to the kitchen wall, a family portrait, father, mother, small boy. But the father's face had been scratched out with something sharp. Deep, deliberate scratches, not the work of time or weather. Someone had done that on purpose. They laughed nervously and kept moving. And then they heard it, from upstairs, a thump, pause, another thump, and Joseph told me it was not random, it was rhythmic, patient, like something marking time. So he and Lukasz decided to go up. The girls stayed downstairs. Now the upstairs hallway was long and narrow. 4 doors, all open, darkness behind each one, and the thumping kept getting louder as they moved toward the far end. The corner room. Joseph said the floorboards announced every single step. There was just no way to move quietly, and he said that at some point it hit him. Whatever was in that room knew they were coming. They reached the doorway. The thumping stopped. Complete silence. So Joseph shone his flashlight into the room and moved the beam slowly from left to right. And in the far corner, there was a man, standing with his back to them, facing the wall directly in front of him. The wall was dark, wet, streaked from floor to ceiling, and the man was breathing. Joseph could see his shoulders rising and falling slowly. He did not turn around, and then, very slowly, the man's head turned, just slightly, just enough for the flashlight to catch the side of his face. He was smiling, so Joseph and Lukasz ran. Down the stairs, through the front door, out into the cold air, and the girls were already screaming before they even reached the bottom of the stairs because something about the sound of 2 people running that fast just tells your body everything it needs to know. And then a sound came from the room above them as they ran. Joseph really struggled to describe it to me. He said it was not a scream, it was not a voice. It was something between the two. A sound, he said, that no human throat should be able to make. They reached their bicycles. They pedaled, and they did not stop until the city lights appeared ahead of them in the darkness. So, when I showed Joseph the registration photograph of Rudolf Novak, he went completely silent. He stared at it for a long time, and then he said, "That's him, that's the man in the corner." Now the third thread was the one that made my hands go cold, because this one involved a child. So a woman named Irina came to the station with her husband, and she kept her youngest son on her lap the entire time she spoke to me, a small boy, 7 years old. She did not let go of him once. She told me they had gone to the Horsky Resort in the Kirkenosha Mountains for a family holiday during the second week of October. They went for the autumn colors, the changing leaves, the clean mountain air, just a normal family trip. On the second evening, the resort held a bonfire in the courtyard. Hayride, roasted chestnuts, children running between the trees with sparklers. And her youngest, she asked me not to use his name and I never have, was sitting by the fire when a man approached him, tall, gray hair, dark coat, quiet smile. He gave the boy a small toy, a cheap laser pointer, a penlight. And Irina saw this from across the fire. Her husband was talking to another man nearby, and she said she thought nothing of it at the time. The man seemed pleasant. He told the boy he was one of the resort owners, so the hayride driver announced. A final ride down the mountain road in the dark with the headlights off for the thrill of it. Her oldest went to find his friends, and her youngest was left sitting by the fire. And when Irina looked up, the 7-year-old was gone. She found him 40 meters away on the pathway leading toward the parking lot. The tall man was walking right beside him, quickly, and a woman was on the other side of the boy, holding his hand, holding it tightly. Irina ran. She screamed her son's name, and she told me her voice did not sound like her own voice. It came from somewhere deeper than her throat. The two strangers stepped away the moment they heard her, calm, rehearsed, the way people move when they have been interrupted before and already know exactly what to do. The woman said something about taking the boy to the front desk, and the man looked at Irina and smiled. The same smile, she said, that you give someone you expect to see again. Then they walked into the darkness between the trees and disappeared. Resort staff had no record of any owners matching their descriptions. The couple had arrived in a dark vehicle, no registration recorded at the gate, and the boy still had the pen light in his coat pocket. Irina threw it into the fire that same night. So I sat with these 3 cases for days. I lined them up on my desk and just stared at them. Elena, Joseph, Irina's son, 3 incidents, 6 weeks apart, and each one moving closer to the city than the last. The mountain resort, the abandoned farm on the city's edge, the psychology office in the old town, getting closer. And I kept thinking about what Alexei had whispered before he disappeared. He watches everyone. So on the night of October 31st, I stayed late at the station. I had Rudolf Novak's file photograph pinned to the board right in front of me. Tall, gray hair, dark coat, quiet smile, approximately 50 years old. Same description, every time, every witness, every location. I packed up my files just before midnight and walked home. I lived alone. 4th floor apartment on a quiet street in Namyesti Miru. I made tea, sat at my desk, reviewed my notes one more time, and then somewhere past midnight I heard a sound outside my window. I told myself it was pigeons. I told myself that for 20 minutes while I sat completely still and did not turn around. When I finally stood and walked to the window and looked down at the street below, it was empty. The gas lamps reflected in the wet cobblestones. Nothing moved, nobody there. I was about to step back when I saw it. On the outside ledge of my window, a small paper bag, and I could see through the glass what was inside it. A cinnamon stick and a child's pen light. I stood at that window for a very long time. I thought about calling my supervisor, but I already knew what he would say. No evidence of threat, no proof of intent, and I thought about what Alexei had told Elena. He followed my teacher home last year. She disappeared in November. It was October 31st, so I went back to my desk. I left the lamp on. I sat down and I kept writing because I did not know what else to do and I needed to keep my hands moving. I am not sure how much time passed. At some point, the lamp flickered once and went still, and somewhere behind me, very quietly, I heard the sound of my window opening. I did not report for duty on November 1st. My apartment was found unlocked. The lamp on my desk was still burning. My case notes were spread across the table. There were no signs of struggle, no signs of forced entry. On the windowsill, facing inward, was a single dried autumn leaf, with a small hole through its center. The case was closed 3 days later. Insufficient evidence. Rudolf Novak was never found. The woman with him was never identified. Alexei Novak was never found. The case file sat in a storage box for 25 years, and when a junior analyst reopened it in 2019, she found something that had not been logged in the original evidence list. Tucked between the last 2 pages of my notes, a photograph. No date, no label, no explanation for how it got there. It showed me sitting at my desk, lamp on writing, taken from outside my window, 4th floor. He was never watching them. He was watching whoever came looking.